HBO's Chernobyl recounts the terrifying catastrophe of a nuclear meltdown in Soviet Russia. I'm Zach Laws of Gold Derby, and with me now is Jared Harris. He's one of the stars of this series. And Jared, why was now an appropriate time, do you think, to tell this story about a nuclear meltdown from about 30 years ago?
Good question. Well, although it is a story about the accident and the heroism and the sacrifices of the people who responded to it, and the cover up by the state regarding the reasons behind it. You can see that there are parallels to certain issues that we're facing today with regards to the people in government deciding that scientific facts that are inconvenient to their point of view, a political point of view, are suppressed or dismissed. And when you're talking about situations that have catastrophic consequences, obviously it's a very dangerous situation, and that there's a parallel to do with that. Obviously, climate science, the denial of the experts, the suppression of the truth, even the very idea that truth is a sort of malleable concept, and that the state has a narrative that they put forward, and if you have information or facts that are counter to that narrative, they silence you. The Soviet Union was a state where everyone understood that was the way things were, and the population had become cynical to the idea that they could hold power to account. And I think that there's obviously, I mean, look what's on the news today. Yeah, I think the parallels are very clear.
Was that part of what attracted you to it? I mean, is that is science and things like that?
No. I mean, the first thing that when my manager called me up to tell me that this they were interested and was I interested, I mean, the first words that were out of her mouth were HBO are doing a mini series about the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. You hear HBO and you go, well, I know it's going to be good quality. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be challenging. And then I read the first 4 episodes, and I mean, 10 pages into it, I was hooked. Less than that, and flipping the pages. And I remember the accident. I was in London at the time, and I had an impression myself about what I thought had happened. And wow, it is so much more complicated than I knew. And it was potentially so much more dangerous. It almost took out Europe. It almost poisoned the water supply for most of Eastern Europe, and that water all floods into the ocean. So God knows what it would have done to everybody else.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a compliment to the filmmaking in this, and that although it's based on a true story that we know, it really is quite suspenseful, and I mean, it's mounted as a really engaging and nail-biting thriller, and it really makes you think about how close we all kind of come to, the brink of annihilation through mishaps and things like that.
Yeah, and stupidity.
Yeah.
Absolute stupidity. People towing party lines, and I mean, what was that about? There's that great line in episode 2 where Emily Watson's character goes to the party leader, the mayor of Minsk or whatever, and warns him about this cloud and how you have to evacuate the town. And he says, "Well, no, I've called up Moscow and they say everything's fine." And she says, "I'm a nuclear physicist, and I'm telling you, you're not fine. And you were the what was it? You were the foreman of a shoe factory." And he says, "Well, I prefer my opinion." Yeah. And that's where we are now.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a small group of people who prefer their opinion as regards to 99% of climate scientists or something extraordinary like that. I mean, it's as close to a consensus as you can get. I mean, you know, that 1% of climate scientists might be saying, I don't know, we might be living in a simulation. So, you know, who can say if it's the simulation or right?
Yeah, I'm only about 99% sure as opposed to 100%.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about the character that you play, and I apologize if I mangled his name. Valery Lagasov, I believe.
Legasov.
Lagasov, thank you. Tell us a bit about him.
Well, a real person who was charged with, he was a nuclear scientist who was charged with going down there and figuring it out, seeing he has a suspicion that the situation is not what they're reporting, that it's worse. It's a bigger problem than they think that it is. And once he gets down there, it's worse. It's the worst scenario he could possibly have imagined. And now they're looking at him as going, all right, well, you're the expert. What do we do? And there's no playbook for this. It's never happened. And he got to figure it out as you go along. And you make mistakes, you know. But basically, the first goal is you've got to put out the fire. The reactor's on fire and it's burning the buildings. And then you've got to try and slow down the reaction so it stops generating heat. You've got to try and stop it from sort of burning through to the Earth's core. And then you've got to try and figure out what this whole area is being contaminated. And wind will carry all that radioactive contamination up into the atmosphere and poison everybody. And you've got to figure out, well, what do we do about that? So, I mean, it was a massive, massive, massive job. And at the end of the day, Gorbachev, more than anything else, in his opinion, it was the Chernobyl disaster that was the beginning of the end of the Soviet Empire, in his opinion.
Yeah. Was there research that you could do in order to, I guess, figure out the character? I mean, obviously you couldn't meet with the guy. I don't know how much of a spoiler that is, but
yeah. Yeah. There's some video evidence and photographic evidence. There's some documentaries that are available on the internet. But ultimately, I did sort of dive into all that stuff, and I sort of realized that obviously Craig had done a deep dive into all this information, and he had made narrative decisions. And I had to follow those decisions. So it was probably the first time I've ever done a role where didn't find the research actually helpful at all.
Yeah. Well, from his scripts, from his 5 scripts, what did you gain from that?
Right, from Craig's scripts.
Yeah, right.
Well, yeah, for me, the way I came to conceive it was he reminded me of the Cassandra character in the Trojan myths. He can see how this can go badly wrong, and no one will listen to him. He's the smartest person in the room that no one pays attention to, and he had no agency. He had no power. Anything that he wanted to have done had to be filtered through Stalin's character. And in the beginning, that was a problem because they had a hostile relationship. Stalin's character, Chernobyl, in our story, feels that Legasov is trying to humiliate him and trying to embarrass him. And they get off on the wrong foot in that. Even that first phone call, when Legasov tries to flag that the radiation reading is a little bit more serious than they're thinking of it being, and Chernobyl goes, well, there's no need to panic, you know, right away. So dismissing him as an alarmist, you know. So I mean, they get off on the wrong foot right away, but through the course of the story, come to trust each other, and it's just, I suppose that level of it is a kind of bromance. But the other part of my conception of it was that he's heroic. I don't think of him as being heroic. He's not naturally heroic. He's not the sort of traditional American square-jawed hero that sort of runs towards the sound of gunfire. He never thought that he'd ever be in that situation, and he watches. For me, I started to observe moments of courage of other people and try to gain power from that, learn from it, and gain some kind of strength from it, solidarity with that, because I saw him as he was scared. He was a person who saw more than anybody else, not just the consequences for the environmental consequences on a grand scale, but he understood, oh my God, this is going to take months to fix. And I could stay here for maybe, I don't know, a couple of weeks before I've received a fatal dose of radiation. And that he makes a calculation that he's dead. He's going to be dead within 5 years. So I don't think that, I don't think that he's not a brave person. So I like the idea of someone who wasn't naturally brave having to step into these ideas of being courageous.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure so many of the other people who are having to deal with this, they're ordinary people who probably never expected to ever be put into a life or death situation where, the fate of so many people is suddenly on their shoulders, So, I mean, it's an interesting dynamic there as opposed to, I guess, John Wayne type that could.
Yeah. They go, without question, they go, stand back. I'll take care of this. He doesn't have that gene in him.
Right. Working with the director, Johan Renck, can you talk a bit about what that collaboration was like and what he gave you?
Well, that was one of the questions that I asked, and I was delighted that they had one director for every episode, because what you get is, it's not just consistency, but you very quickly develop a shorthand. You understand what their vision is, what they're going after, and so when you're imagining scenes that you're preparing, you already know the world that you need to fit into, because obviously Johan's there every day dealing with the entirety of the story. You can't suddenly come at it almost from a different point of view and different genre. And one of the things that Johan said was, the stakes are high enough in this thing that we don't need to describe how high the stakes are in our performance. This is a big deal, and one of the things that he said I agreed with was, well, quite often, for example, you see the video footage, say, for example, of the towers coming down. You're stunned. You don't react. You don't know what to do, and people are sort of coming from that point of view of it's not making sense. And you're trying to compute what's happening in your mind. There's a dissonance there. And then so you pick your moments very carefully for when there's sort of the fight or flight thing starts to happen, when it becomes not exaggerated, because there was nothing sensationalized about the approach. But, you're earning those big dramatic moments in that sense. I love that approach. It was obviously a sort of very, very internal approach. And then I think another thing that I admire about what he and the DP did was, so on one level, there's the documentary approach, in the sense that you're witnessing those scenes in the Politburo in a kind of as though there'd been a camera in the room type of thing. But he also somehow managed to give themselves the license to get great scope and epic scope and visual beauty, and again, without the visual beauty being romanticized in any way. I mean, it was he finds sort of stark and shocking and disturbing beauty in visual composition within scenes, and I admire that tremendously. That it comes from his background. in photography. He was always taking pictures, constantly taking pictures. And you know, when you do something that's on this scale, you need to have that visual element to it. It needs to fulfill certain desires that you have as a viewer for that kind of scale as well.
Yeah, I mean, from you know, just watching the very first episode onward, I mean, the first thing that struck me about it was the visual style of it, you know, and how on the one hand it's very austere, and on the other hand it's very epic at the same time. You know, I mean, it does a really good job of kind of putting you right there. You know, I wanted to.
Good seat.
I'm sorry.
And always with a good seat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thankfully, you're not actually there, but you know. You've done a lot of really great television work in the last few years. You know, Emmy-nominated work on Mad Men, BAFTA-nominated work on The Crown, The Terror, which we talked about last year. Being able to, you know, play a character over, you know, in the case of this, 5 episodes, or The Terror, 10 episodes, Mad Men, multiple seasons. I mean, is that exciting for you? Do you enjoy doing that?
I favor the limited series format. I've only ever signed a long-term contract once in my life, and that was in my 3rd season of Mad Men, and then they bumped me off.
Very famously, yeah.
Yes, before I had to fulfill, you know. I mean, I favor the idea of the limited series. One of the reasons is you can get most of the scripts, and so you have an idea what it is that you're getting into and where the story's going. On those sort of multiple season things, you don't really know what's going to happen. You don't even know if the showrunner is going to be around. I mean, they tried to get rid of Matt Weiner, wasn't it, after 2 seasons on Mad Men. So yeah, I do, and as opposed to say why this, as opposed to cinema, I feel like the studios have given up on an adult audiences. They did that quite a while ago, and TV has stepped into that vacuum, and there's an appetite amongst the audiences for complicated stories, and for nuanced characters, and for challenging stories. You know, so and I grew up loving the movies of the 70s. And for me, the closest you can get to that is what they're doing now on television, on HBO and you know, Netflix, Amazon, AMC. These guys are taking big risks with their storytelling.
Well, this certainly reminded me of a movie from the 70s. So I think,
yeah.
I think you've fulfilled your wish in that regard. Jared Harris, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking with you again, and congratulations on the show.
God bless you. Thank you so much. Thanks for chatting with me.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you at home for watching. Make sure you hit the subscribe button below, and make sure you visit us at goldderby.com for all the latest award show news.